The protagonist cheerfully held a bouquet of flowers, telling us that his name is Ling. Today marks 1 month of dating with his girlfriend. However, what he didn't expect was that his girlfriend would break up with him on the same day. The protagonist begged her not to leave, but at that moment, a car skidded near them and stopped next to the girl. The driver wished the girl a happy birthday, as it seemed to be her day. She told the protagonist that they needed to go to an international financial center because he would take her to a luxury restaurant and buy her a gift. Looking at the protagonist, she said that to win someone like her, money was necessary, suggesting that he wasn't worthy of her. She left, leaving the protagonist wondering if he deserved it. People around wondered if the protagonist wasn't worthy of her as they looked at his birth date and the girl's beauty. However, she seemed to be materialistic, as everyone noticed. The protagonist worked part-time as a janitor at school to pursue Lu and had saved money to buy gifts for her. His classmate commented on how hard the protagonist had tried, but the rich boy won her over in a matter of days. In the end, the protagonist wondered if this happened because he was poor or just because he was a frustrated janitor. He swore not to give his heart again. At that moment, Windows appeared out of nowhere and told the protagonist that he needed to activate the Divine Opponent system. After activation, the system showed his statistics, including the impressive billion-dollar counterattack ability. Additionally, the system gave him a card with billions of dollars to spend as he pleased, transferring only 1% of the spending to his personal wealth. Confused, the protagonist asked if he could spend $1 trillion as he wished, and the system confirmed it but reminded him of the counterattack limitation. With a smile, the protagonist declared that the counterattack should begin. While passing through the commercial district, he was determined to find someone to test his new power. Soon, he spotted someone who seemed to be Legion's ex-girlfriend. The protagonist found a beautiful woman and immediately initiated the counterattack mission. The system showed the state of the girl named Luego, who is 21 years old. Importantly, she told the protagonist that when the host's favorability index exceeds 90%, 10% of the money spent will revert to the host's personal wealth. When the favorability level reaches 100%, the host's status will change, and the relationship between the host and the target will change. With the girl's favorability currently at 20%, the protagonist approached her to ask if he could bother her for a moment. The girl asked if he planned to ask for help again, telling him to give up since his girlfriend found a rich second-generation boyfriend. However, the protagonist misunderstood and just wanted to invite her for a milk tea, thinking of testing the system with her. The girl rejected the protagonist's offer because she didn't know him well, and this wasn't an ordinary milk tea, as a cup cost 10 days' worth of fast food. She asked if he could afford it, but people in line urged the protagonist to hurry up because they also wanted to buy. The protagonist asked everyone to wait for a moment and asked the girl how many cups of milk tea were in line. She replied that there were 180 cups in total. The protagonist swiped his card, and the machine confirmed a successful expenditure of 39,800. The girl told the protagonist to pack everything quickly, surprising some people who didn't expect him to actually make the purchase. Others praise, but the important thing is that the girl's favorability has increased. The protagonist approaches her and says he has a small favor to ask. When she asks what he needs, he replies that he needs her to spend money at a store where the bag his girlfriend wanted is. The girl's friend shows the protagonist the bag and says it's a limited edition bag from the store, costing $38,000. He asks the protagonist if he's going to buy it and if he cares about it. However, just as the protagonist is about to answer, he is interrupted by his ex-girlfriend, who asks if he is cheating again. She tells the protagonist that they're done because he was so unpleasant. The protagonist simply asks, who's following whom, since he's just following someone to buy a bag. The ex-girlfriend asks how he can buy a bag with someone else and if he couldn't come up with a better excuse to play the fool. Meanwhile, the system alerts the protagonist to start the counterattack mission against the antagonist. He tells her that since they broke up, they are no longer involved, and she can do whatever she wants. He asks if she thinks he's still the same person as before, but Ryder, the girl, says it's only been a few hours. She asks if he went from poor to rich in that time. The protagonist tells her to think about it and says he can't afford it now, as buying just one bag is not enough. He calls the saleswoman and says he'll take everything in the store, surprising everyone. The total price is $11.32 million. And the protagonist asks if he can pay for it. His friends call him crazy, but when he swipes the card, it goes through, leaving him surprised. He wonders if he really bought everything, and the girl hugs him, calling him kind. Unlike some people on the surface who are affectionate with their girlfriends but unwilling to spend money, the protagonist keeps a low profile. A lady approaches him, and he seems to know her. She asks what he's doing there, saying he bought clothes, shoes, watches, and even lent a car, but he was actually looking for a lover behind her back. It seems the lover is a sycophant trying to justify what he did. Approaching the protagonist's ex-girlfriend, the girl admits she made a mistake and points to her, saying she seduced him because she is the only one in his heart. The girl then tells the protagonist that she will give him a chance if he slaps the ex-girlfriend twice. If he does, she will forgive him, otherwise, they are done. The protagonist doesn't hesitate and slaps the ex-girlfriend, who falls to the ground. She approaches him, calling him a cheater who seduces other people's boyfriends. People tell the protagonist that the necklace she is wearing is his, causing so much humiliation that she quickly asks for help. However, the protagonist turns away and ignores her, making her leave crying. In the meantime, we can observe how the system shows the protagonist as more favorable, making him wonder why she is indifferent, but her favoritism for him has increased. Instead of reciprocating, he cancels and tells her he didn't expect Venti to be such a person, especially considering she's a nun. He thinks it's lamentable and wonders if the protagonist will soften her heart. However, the protagonist smiles and tells her that a gold digger doesn't deserve sympathy and that she should leave him alone. Hearing these words, she thinks Venti is completely dead to the protagonist and tells him that he was so kind to her that she doesn't know how to repay him. This makes the protagonist suggest that she could pay with her body. She gets all embarrassed, and the protagonist tells her to stop talking nonsense. In the meantime, we can observe how her favorability increases even more, reaching 68% for the protagonist. With the waters calm, the girl tells the protagonist that it's not impolite of him to come, and she can spend some money. With her, she ends up taking the protagonist to a store and tells him that she doesn't know how to dress and that it's not surprising that some people belittle her. After trying on some clothes, the protagonist decides to go with one that really suits him, surprising everyone, including the local girls who didn't expect him to be so handsome. The girls think that his ex-girlfriend didn't know how to appreciate him and that he will now be theirs. When the protagonist sees himself in the mirror, he is also surprised by his own appearance. However, he knows that all this happened thanks to money. Time passes, and we move to the girls' room where one of them arrives at his apartment, happy about what happened to the protagonist. However, upon entering, she is surprised to see the protagonist's girlfriends and asks what happened to her face, as she is clearly well-dressed and is a total change. She smiles and says she's fine thanks to the protagonist, who helped to reveal her true nature. Otherwise, she would have been lost in the darkness. She shows the bag that the protagonist bought for her, and when the friend asks about it, she responds that the protagonist bought it for her and that she should get used to. Seeing that the bag is not a problem, she hugs the protagonist's boyfriend and says she was worried if he would mind, but he said no, as they are all good sisters. However, both of them think otherwise, with the protagonist's girlfriend thinking that she cannot interfere in their 3-year relationship, while the other girl wonders if she was blind not to recognize the protagonist as a rich boy, saying that he is now hers. The protagonist tells the friends of the protagonist who were nearby that he is tired after a day of shopping with his girl. However, he worries about the idea of having to spend money every time he wants to buy something. The protagonist's thoughts are interrupted by some guys, and one of them approaches and asks the protagonist how much the outfit costs. This guy, named, tells the protagonist that he heard about what happened to his girlfriend and tries to cheer him up by telling him to look on the bright side. In his opinion, the protagonist spent a lot of money on his girlfriend but still left her. He shows the protagonist his phone, suggesting that he should do a live stream to receive donations, saying that the host will obey if the protagonist gives gifts during the stream. Also, the friend of this guy tells the protagonist that if he gives gifts during the stream, the goddess will surrender to him if necessary. However, he warns that this is not for the faint of heart. The protagonist is excited by this information as he sees the opportunity to earn a lot of money during the live stream. He thanks the guy, who wonders how the protagonist can thank him since he behaved strangely. However, one of the friends says it doesn't matter because it's not fun, and they should go watch Zaxa live. The protagonist arrives in his room and quickly downloads the app that will allow him to watch the girls live to make donations. After downloading the app, he searches for the name of the girl mentioned by the guys, Zaxa, whom he was surprised by her energy, and wonders if he can start a counterattack mission with this ranking screen. The system appears and tells the protagonist that the normal target value must be at least 80 points to start the counterattack mission, and the live stream is affected by beauty screen effects, so it is impossible to judge unless they are offline. The protagonist agrees with the system, thinking that Sasha must have a score above 90, and he shouldn't worry. He goes back to watching Sasha's stream and sees a gift, a golden tiger sent by someone named. The value of this gift is over $10,000. The protagonist is confused about how to send gifts while watching, and Sean in the stream chat says that the opponent will definitely use some useless tactics and try to set the pace, but they shouldn't worry about the opponent's tactics. They should spend all their efforts. Your strength. As soon as the game starts, he also mentions that there will be a live battle. However, the protagonist interrupts the conversation to ask Sasha how much time he needs to recharge to become the first on the list, asking whether he should first buy the gift or first mark the brand here. They say the protagonist is at level 1 while the salt is at level 24, and yet the protagonist considers himself too poor to have money. This seems to displease Zaxa, who decides to kick the protagonist out of the live broadcast because the protagonist did not send her any gifts. So, he asks the administrators to kick him out. Upon seeing that he has been expelled, the protagonist decides to check how much money he can send in the Schwan room. He asks Chua what will happen if he surrenders, and she suggests a lighter punishment if he does. However, the protagonist asks what the problem is, and the anchoring begins the battle. When the battle starts, it becomes clear that Zaxa is winning by a large margin with a score of 58,000 against the protagonist's 22. His followers encourage him not to surrender. However, Zaxa receives a notification that Muito Pobre para ter dinheiro, too poor to have money, sent a golden dragon as a gift, valued at 15,000 coins. She thanks the protagonist for the gift, is surprised to find out that he is too poor to have money, and the protagonist impresses everyone by sending 10 golden dragons, increasing Sasha's score from 58,000 to 52,000. He continues to send golden dragons, surprising everyone even more. The protagonist sends a total of 1,600 golden dragons, astonishing everyone present. Sasha finally asks him to wait, questioning why he doesn't wait until he has double the points during the battle. However, the protagonist doesn't stop sending golden dragons. When he finally stops, Zaxa realizes that he has been watching her live stream for a year and has had over 1 million views. She is impressed with the amount of money he sent. Sasha is moved by the 24 million coins she received with the 1,600 golden dragons but is also happy. She asks why he is still sitting there and if he is afraid, challenging him to stand up and accept the punishment. The punishment involves bowing, spinning in circles, and jumping at the same time in a single move. She still keeps her word and challenges him. He accepts the challenge but apologizes to the protagonist for expelling him earlier, admitting that he was wrong. She becomes very upset that, if it weren't for young Master Yu, the 1,600 golden dragons would have been hers. It is important to note that the live stream audience started calling the protagonist Mr. Money, because it became clear that it was thanks to him that Miss Zaxa managed to beat Miss Yu. The final score showed that Miss Sasha had 58,600 points, while Miss Yu had over 2 million, indicating a significant difference. After the broadcast, the system informs the protagonist that young Master Yu, level 24, has left the live broadcast room. The protagonist receives messages from Miss Dim, Miss Shui, and Miss Zaxa, apologizing sincerely and asking if they can be friends or even brothers. Miss Shui thanks the protagonist and asks to be added to contacts, sending her phone number. Miss Zaxa says she was about to kick out young Master Yu but didn't expect him to leave first. She apologizes to the protagonist and suggests making amends, inviting him to dinner since she noticed he's in the town of Anjinya, and she'll be passing through for a photo session. She's worried that the protagonist may not want to spend money on her, but he accepts the invitation, making her happy. The next day, the protagonist wakes up feeling well rested. However, he receives a message that interrupts him before seeing who sent the message. His roommate suggests they have breakfast together, but the protagonist declines, explaining that a girl will bring breakfast. This surprises his roommates. The protagonist's roommates didn't expect him to start saying strange things so early in the morning. One of his roommates mentions hearing that the protagonist was dumped by his girlfriend, but the night before, he seemed so relaxed, which piques his curiosity. The protagonist wonders about it too, as he had pursued his girlfriend for 3 years. The scene shifts to the girls' dormitory, where a guy is at the entrance with a gift, not breakfast. Apparently, each guy will give breakfast to one of the girls, and the protagonist's girlfriend is on the list. They question why this guy is giving breakfast, and he explains that he's doing it because he pursued the protagonist's ex-girlfriend for 3 years. This is due to the fact that the ex-girlfriend and the protagonist had recently posted on social media that they were completely single and in love. So, this guy thought they were referring to them. One of the guys, who also wanted to give breakfast to the girls, is the redhead from before. He boasts about his light and sweet breakfast, noodles with French restaurant milk toppings, costing about $600, or well, $601. While flaunting his breakfast, he tells his friends that to win a girl, it's just a matter of money. If you give her a few dollars a day for a year, she'll just think you're cheap. But with a few $100s a day, you could have her in a week. However, when the expected girls arrive, the protagonist and the boys immediately rush to give them breakfast. The redhead, who wanted to give breakfast to the protagonist's ex-girlfriend, recognizes her and compliments her appearance. He tells her that he bought her breakfast that day, light and sweet noodles with low calories from the French restaurant. However, as he continues to boast about the breakfast, the protagonist realizes that he forgot to thank the redhead for bringing breakfast. The redhead asks the protagonist if he just arrived and if he's also going to buy breakfast for his ex-girlfriend, who left yesterday. He reassures the protagonist that it's not a problem for him, given the protagonist's persistence over the last 3 years. The redhead tells the protagonist that today is not his lucky day and suggests he come back early the next day. However, the protagonist manages to approach him and asks if he hasn't had breakfast yet. The protagonist replies that he hasn't, as she had invited him and sent a message in the morning saying she would treat him to dinner. The protagonist's roommates are surprised by this, as a girl did bring breakfast for him. When they realize this, the girl who brought breakfast for the protagonist looks surprised. The protagonist's ex-girlfriend, seeing that she has approached him, knows she needs to hurry, as every step she takes, no matter how simple, could have a point to it. Returning to her, she lovingly offers the breakfast that the redhead gave to the protagonist while we watched as the system told the protagonist that his favorability was increasing even more. This makes the protagonist wonder why the girl brought breakfast, but he questions why her favorability increased. The protagonist's ex-girlfriend, upon seeing that she didn't want to be left behind, also brings breakfast to the protagonist. As she passes by, she tells the protagonist that it's aunt's breakfast set for 368,000 years that she bought especially for him. She confesses that she made a mistake the day before, and the protagonist would have to repay her. Getting very close to the protagonist, she tells him that she understands that he has given so much in the last 3 years and that she is very excited. The protagonist used to bring breakfast every day, and because she was too naive, she allowed herself to be deceived. That's why she asks the protagonist if he will forgive her when she sees that she wants to try. For the past 3 years, every time he was disappointed with her, she would try to give up, making this gesture. However, when he returned to being her puppy, she would immediately distance herself. Since the protagonist didn't want to be controlled again, he turned and told her that it wasn't good for his puppy to see her so close. In other words, the protagonist, who used to not care about how many suitors she had and even worried about her image, now raises the idea that he still likes her. Meanwhile, the other girl thought that the protagonist had pushed away his ex-girlfriend because she had used this trick before, but apparently it didn't work this time. She said it must be her fault. While they were pondering this, the protagonist wondered how these two increased their affection at the same time. Others who also had questions were wondering what was happening because the protagonist's ex-boyfriend and another person were pleading together with the protagonist. So, they wondered if the two girls were good friends. However, the girls told the protagonist to eat his breakfast, and when he sat down, his ex-girlfriend approached him and told him to open his mouth, while the other girl was a bit upset because the protagonist's ex-boyfriend was gaining ground. Surprised at what he was seeing, the protagonist asked why they were stealing his spotlight. A man with red hair asked the protagonist who the ex-girlfriend was. The protagonist answered the man's question, saying that she had called him more than 1,600 times in a row the previous night, and he got cramps. Thanks to God, someone fed him today. The protagonist's ex-girlfriend, wanting to take advantage of the situation, held the protagonist's hand and asked if he was in pain, saying that he should let her come later. She said she didn't want to be parked by the protagonist's ex-girlfriend, drawing the protagonist's attention, saying that the noodles were delicious. With a beautiful girl in front of him, who would say no? The protagonist agreed that it was delicious but didn't like the bright red color. When she asked why it was bright red, saying that her noodles were all pink, he whispered to her that he would change the color later, causing the protagonist to vomit blood from what he heard. Meanwhile, a man with yellow hair or the protagonist just relaxed with his two girls feeding him. However, someone took photos of the protagonist and immediately sent them to Campos' mailbox. The title of the photo is "The Girl from the Language Course Class in the Literature Department Who is Giving Breakfast to the Protagonist." Upon seeing the email, Campos immediately informs the protagonist who is in the news, and people from the news department are coming to interview. However, when he says he is the protagonist, he flees the place. Upon hearing this, his friend says that the protagonist used to be a rich boy with a low profile who didn't like to show off. The protagonist thinks that nobody from the journalism department is following him, but he receives a message from Miss Sasha saying she will disembark at Jean Agos Airport at 7:30 that night and asks if he will pick her up. He is eager to meet Miss Sasha. Arriving at the airport, the protagonist was already there, thinking that Miss Sasha had said she was off the plane because he hadn't seen her yet. He wonders if she's the type his mother wouldn't recognize after using a beauty mask. The protagonist ends up finding Miss Sasha, who was being harassed by some of her followers. Since the protagonist wouldn't allow that, he stood in front of her and told the guy it was time for him to get a new pair of glasses, as he couldn't even understand Miss Sasha's expression. The protagonist was simply asked by Miss Zaxa who he was. However, before the protagonist could respond, Miss Zaxa recognized him, telling him that his clothes were the same as WX's. She didn't know what WX was, but they continued, and the protagonist confirmed that indeed, he was Mr. Kian, the money master. While the glasses-wearing guy apologized, Miss Sasha told the protagonist that he arrived at the right moment, as someone had bothered her, claiming to be her fan. As soon as he appeared, she didn't know him at all and always thought the protagonist was a big businessman around 40 years old. However, she was surprised to discover that he was young and handsome. The protagonist told her to just call him Link and complimented her, saying he didn't expect her to look better than in the live broadcast. At this moment, the protagonist received a system message instructing him to start the counterattack mission. The system informed the protagonist that the counterattack mission should begin at the airport exit after receiving Miss Zaxa. Seeing him, she immediately asked why he was there. He replied that he was there to pick her up since he couldn't let her take a taxi alone. Startled, she asked him who the person next to him was. She answered that the protagonist was the direct man whose username was too poor to have money. Miss Zaxa recognized the protagonist due to the fame he gained in the first battle but didn't expect him to be so young. He wouldn't have come to pick her up if he knew the protagonist was coming in a car worth more than 5 million. She also didn't know what kind of car the protagonist was driving, but he claimed it was a small electric car, surprising Miss Zaxa. After leaving the airport, the protagonist's motorcycle is tied on top of the luxurious car worth more than 5 million. While looking at the motorcycle, the protagonist wonders if the money he paid in the directory, over 20 million, is real. This surprises the protagonist, who thinks the protagonist is very discreet and tells him that Miss Zaxa wouldn't mind taking the small electric car, but it would be more. It is convenient for her to take her car as luggage. He asks the protagonist if he thinks this is true, and the protagonist responds affirmatively. However, Miss Sasha apparently is not convinced of the protagonist's identity and wonders if he is really the person they were expecting. When they reach their destination, which appears to be a restaurant, Miss Sasha enters immediately, greeting all the guests. She introduces the protagonist as the man who defeated young Master Hugo and knocked out his teeth in the fight the night before. This surprises everyone, as they all comment that the protagonist looks very young. The protagonist thinks that Miss Sasha invited him to dinner to make amends, but she actually invited some big shots who gave her gifts to accompany him. She says, "So, this is Miss Sasha's boss scene, and the famous live announcer has a lot of heart when starting dinner." She comments to everyone that the protagonist always drives a small electric donkey to accompany Miss Sasha. This makes one of them laugh, perhaps considering it a joke from the protagonist. How is it possible that he doesn't have money to buy a car if he spent more than 20 million on gifts? Looking at the protagonist, he asks if this is true because if 20 million is just the protagonist's pocket money, he must have more than $1 billion. Patting the protagonist on the shoulder, he says he knows a lot of people in an age. Still, the protagonist says his name is Link and that he doesn't know anyone rich in Anna with that name. It seems this guy was investigating the protagonist, as people laughed when they heard his words, telling Miss Sasha not to be fooled. Trickery. Meanwhile, Miss Zaxa asks the protagonist if he is truly an imposter and if he will allow him to take her donkey in his car. Another person also asks Miss Zaxa if she has ever seen a photo of the protagonist, leaving her speechless. We can observe that her favorability has dropped to -10% with this response. She seems to think that she confirmed on the protagonist's phone that he is too poor to have money, but she's not worried because she just wants him as her ATM. She thanks the protagonist for always caring about her but establishes that there is no link between the three main families in Shanghai. She asks the protagonist if he is the young master of the family in Shanghai, making everyone laugh a bit and thinking that Miss Sasha is speaking for him, but she actually just wants to confirm his identity. He responds that he doesn't know the Link family but is sure he doesn't have as much money as them, making everyone laugh again. The chubby guy warns the protagonist to be careful as he might get struck by lightning. He also thinks the protagonist probably won over $20 million in the lottery since he couldn't get a date with his aunt. Miss Charge mocks the protagonist in a striped tie, saying he claimed to have more money than the Link family. Then, she asks the protagonist what kind of car he drives and how many supercars are in his collection. However, the protagonist approaches Miss Sasha and asks what type of car she likes because he will buy one for her right away. Nevertheless, they continue underestimating the protagonist, telling him not to talk nonsense and that he cannot pretend to be rich. Miss Zaxa answers the protagonist's question, saying she loves the Ferrari F60, and if he gives it to her, she will give him an equivalent value gift. However, we can see that her favorability drops even more, reaching -15% compared to the protagonist. This seems to impress the protagonist, as the surface is full of enthusiasm, but his favorability is plummeting, and this acting skill can kill a lot of fresh meat, so to speak. Having said that, the protagonist simply leaves and goes to buy the car for Miss Zaxa. Half an hour later, those leaving the place thought the protagonist was just a clown, as he really played the fool, while Miss Chaya thought the outbreak was really a liar. Originally, still, there was a spark of hope, but at that moment, it was blinded by several lights all at once. These lights were coming from sports cars, and in the midst of them was the protagonist. They were surprised to see all the sports cars in the location, and the protagonist immediately apologized to Mr. Nyo because he couldn't get out of his multi-million-dollar car. Literally, the protagonist was mocking him, and now it was his turn to be embarrassed. Mr. Nyo was so excited that he expressed his desire to buy a sports car and asked the protagonist to help him choose. The protagonist didn't seal the deal since his business was to provide services, and his assets were verified by the Dragon Band's Black Diamond card, which surprised everyone upon hearing its name. It required at least $1 billion in assets to obtain it. The protagonist claimed that his cars were fake, probably rented to impress, but Mr. Mill reassured everyone, stating that he knew Chief New well and that there was a reason for his respect. The protagonist approached Miss Zaxa, saying that she arrived at the right time, as all the hardware cost more than $15 million, which he considered cheap, and he couldn't gift her one. This made Miss Zaxa ask why he thought it was cheap, and the protagonist explained that Chief New said those who like the Ferrari F60 also like the Ferrari LF, and he would buy one for her. The protagonist swiped the card, and the cost of the Ferrari was $32 million, surprising everyone. They were amazed that the protagonist spent so much. With over $30 million in a car, Mr. Nyo handed the keys to the protagonist and asked if it was a gift for his girlfriend. The protagonist replied that it wasn't because it was the most expensive thing he could get at his dealership, but he was planning to buy an even more expensive one, maybe a $100 million. Miss Sasha already thanked the protagonist, but he insisted there was no need to thank him as he enjoyed spending his money. This made Miss Sasha like him even more. Apologizing for the misunderstanding, they apologized to the protagonist, who confirmed it was all a misunderstanding. They apologized while he adjusted his pinstripe tie and heard that the protagonist planned to buy an even more expensive car. The protagonist mentioned that the director of the city's largest car dealership, Jin and Yang, had many more advanced supercars, though he wasn't sure if he could impress the protagonist. They suggested taking a look and offering the biggest discount as a sincere apology. However, before the protagonist could respond, Miss Chai approached him, expressing her desire to test the car and asking if he could accompany her. This led the protagonist to ask her why she didn't test the car alone, but she whispered in his ear that she thought about it and would have to return the gift if she did. She suggested that she could only return it in installments, with the first payment being made in the same place where they were together, just the two of them. During this conversation, he blushed, thinking that a popular presenter who knows how to work had piqued his curiosity. Therefore, the protagonist decides to go with the girl in the car. While alone, she hands him a pen and asks if he can sign her leg. However, when the protagonist lifts her leg slightly, she becomes embarrassed. In the end, the protagonist signs it, and she explains that it's a record of the payments she made, marking each payment. The protagonist asks if she's satisfied, and she responds affirmatively. After a while, they arrive at a hotel where she was live streaming to her followers, telling them she went to the city of Yang and didn't expect the protagonist to give her a car without saying anything. You can see what her followers are saying about it. While Miss Chai was live streaming, a man in a suit approaches the protagonist, saying that a group of wealthy people wants to meet Mr. Keen, meaning the protagonist. The protagonist agrees to join the group, but at that moment, he receives a call. He doesn't know who the caller is, but the person on the other end says they received a message that the class 3 of the school would organize a meeting tomorrow in Ancheon, where the protagonist also studies. He asks if the protagonist wants to go, and the protagonist agrees, as he has nothing else to do. He heard that Genji, who is now a star in the literature department of Andeong University, will also be at the meeting, despite being former classmates. He tells her that only he gave her enough money to take care of her. The other girl supports, saying that she thinks she's only safe holding a wine glass. Then, he apologizes, saying he got stuck in traffic without mentioning how beautiful she is, even without makeup. The system evaluates her appearance at 94 points, finding it great that the system scores are so high. Fong Billing invites Zakshuam to sit next to him, mentioning that there's also a vacant seat next to him. She sits beside him, saying that she hasn't seen him in a long time, without even mentioning that she thought she had forgotten his name. She replies that she remembers everyone's name in the room. Her passion level for him is 0%, shocking everyone, thinking about how bold and daring it is to sit next to the school queen. Bill comes over, bothering a university student for 3 years, asking why he didn't bring her here. Everyone would like to meet her. Linda replies that they broke up the day before yesterday. Fong Billing asks how they broke up, then, after hearing the backstory of chasing her for 3 years, he continues by saying, "Let's go." He only says that because he needs to. One of the girls says that only fools can be deceived by such lies. She says, "So what? Is that so ugly?" She used to consider him an honest man, but even after college, he became a scoundrel. Linda replies that she's just telling the truth. The inflation index drops by 1%. And Linda doesn't know what to do. He realizes this is his chance. He heard that she is interested in artifacts, and he recently bought a late 20th century painting from a collector in Shanghai. He asks if she wants to take a look. She gets up and goes to the painting, and Fong Billing follows the path, putting his hand on her shoulder, calling her a beggar to let her know her place. Zakshuam tries to please her, and then he adds that there's one more thing. He would make it impossible for the queen to find a job. In Hugo Jung, even after graduation, he approaches Disiashan and tells her how much he likes this paint. In a few days, an auction will be held in the city where another painting, Blessing of the Angels, will be sold. He tells Fong Billing that he didn't know he was interested in Renaissance artists. She asks if she can take a closer look, and he says yes, please. She considers it and thinks to herself that it worked. It took him a long time and effort to learn these hobbies, even though they're nothing special. Linda says he's also interested in Da Vinci's paintings and asks if they can look at the painting. The system reports that the artifact assessment skill was selected with a smile, but thinks to itself that yes, he is a fool and will regret it. Then he wonders if he curses and also likes to give a 20 if he would like to share his opinion. He wonders what he thinks of this image. Zhenling says it's fake and continues to say that in his later work he favored the fine repainting technique. A small amount of pigment in a large amount of castor oil was used to make the paint, and each stroke has a translucent effect. The colors of this painting are opaque due to the excess of pigment. Additionally, he likes to shade the corners of the eyes and mouth of the figures to achieve an infinitely rough effect. Then they look at China in shock. He tells the female that unfortunately, this Maria is fake. He angrily bought a forgery, and the eye starts to tremble. Fong Byler says that an amateur would probably believe his words, but he is not like that. He immediately sees that he acquired some worn-out expert skills on the internet. Others think that pretending is right and should be stopped. Then, if there was one, she goes past him. She said she also studied Da Vinci's paintings, and yes, beautiful, she is right. This is a high-quality imitation. Everyone is shocked, opening their mouths and screaming. Then, hearing the head syndrome, he asks how Zenling acquired knowledge. Fong Billy, a man specialized in rare and exquisite artifacts, responds that he learned to appreciate many cultural relics and art objects since childhood. He became deeply saddened when he realized that foreign countries deprived his homeland of so many cultural values. His goal is to buy back all the artifacts and return them to his country. Chili then laughs and says he almost believes him, thinking he can actually retrieve all the artifacts. Fong Billy responds that with a certain amount of money, there is nothing he cannot buy. Everyone laughs at his words. After these remarks, she had the same dreams and realistic goals. The degree of her passion increased by 5%. Dreams of restoring these artifacts seem distant, just a goal he will definitely achieve. Fong Bill, intensely angry, decides to somehow show off in front of him and try to steal his thunder. He decides it's worth showing the poor man his rightful place. Food is brought to the table: Tuscany salad, Brussels chocolate soufflé, Canadian veal leg with seasonal vegetables, and venison stew with salad and spices. People at the table admire how delicious it smells. They have never eaten such sumptuous food before. They wonder why all the dishes are different. Fong Billy responds with a smile, saying he doesn't know. The chef decides what to serve. The chef used to work at a 3-star Michelin restaurant and has a bit of personality. It all depends on his mood when cooking. He mentions that it seems Linda brought bad luck, as they brought him smelly bread and the same salad pieces. No one mentions it's steamed bread. Fong Billy suggests it might be molecular cuisine. Michelin-starred chefs love to cook things like distant strawberry-flavored items. He takes a piece of bread with a fork, thinking that, as expected, they are steamed buns and zucchini. There's nothing surprising about it. Fong Beer asks Linda with a smile how steamed buns from a Michelin-starred chef taste. If he doesn't like it, he'll ask the chef to remove the dish and prepare a new one. But the chef's dishes are of high quality. High quality takes 1 minute 2 hours to prepare. The girl next to him says it's worth waiting 2 hours to try the Michelin chef's dishes. He says yes, not waiting. He won't be able to go to karaoke on an empty stomach and starts laughing. The girl responds, saying that what comes next is karaoke, which is great, but teases him, looking shocked while Zenning talks to Zaya. She explains that the gold mask's no-side pattern is for both aesthetics and wrinkle elimination. The wisdom of the ancients never ceases to amaze. Zaishu's inflation rate is increasing by 2%, she informs them. In Lin's, she says she thinks her experience is almost equal to that of her teachers. Next time, Zinni could join them and appreciate some artifacts together. Fong Billing is completely shocked. Then a notification arrives on the phone, with a link that he has already used, inviting him to join the Prince's Millions group. Dispensa says he was invited by his 11 yesterday to join today's rich crew. Zine opens the group, reads the dialogue, and thinks maybe he should send an intense welcome gift here. As he can't spend money on a man, he'll find a girl. He notices a girl in the group who seems pretty. He sends 18,880,000 yen to a smiling Angler. He writes that he can't send a big red envelope, so he just transferred the money. This causes shock and admiration among the other group members. A user asks Linda where he is now and if he wants to go to Mary Singh. He responds that he's right there now, and all the group members who are also nearby go to him. Fong Billion, who invited the rich man to the Merit, writes to him that he is the young owner of the Merit and gives his full name. He will pay for everything he spends today at his bar. He can buy whatever he wants. Zimming responds with a smile, telling him that what he's writing is not worth spending so much money on a brush without thinking. How coincidental that it's Fong Billion, the name of a high-ranking prince, replies that it doesn't even need to be discussed. He is a hospitable person, that's all. Who would have thought? He looks at himself with a sinister smile and thinks it's over. Now he knows many rich and powerful people, making even more connections. He decides that when the rich arrive, he just needs to complain to them about Zimming. He imagines how he will tell the rich that it's worth drinking, showing dissatisfaction with his appearance. Some of them will ask if Mr. Funk is in a bad mood, and he will reply that only a brainless fool won't leave him alone. Immediately, everyone around starts asking who this bastard is and how he dares to offend Mr. Funk. The rich will say that Ling is crying and lying on the ground, ensuring he can't stay in an age. Others support him, saying they will help too. They will tell the Human Resources Department to fire Zimming. Fong Billion thinks with a smile that this way, he can get to know a new rich man, humiliate Ling, and show off to his rich friends. He will kill 3 birds with 1 stone because he is clever. Fong Billion stands up and asks if everyone has eaten properly. He invites everyone to the karaoke room on the top floor, where he has arranged a meeting with some of the rich people in the city to communicate with the upper class. Everyone is shocked because they didn't know that Fong Billion had these connections. They all go down to the Golden Splendor Hall and settle into large sofas. Welcome to your rich hosts. Those who came with him think Fong Billion is so handsome. It seems they are from different worlds. One of the guys says that Fong invited them to meet famous people from now on. He will spend more time with Lion. Fong Billion introduces Chico Han, the main owner of the property, Mr. Chu, and also introduces Mr. Chu. When he hears about the Asia family, he says he met her father, Zia, holding a glass in his hand, isolating himself. The man continues, saying he heard she is very beautiful, and that's true. Then, a worker approaches Fong Billion, apologizing and starting to say something to him. The worker points to Ziming, his classmate, saying he would like to order a bottle of Aurora Rosso cherry wine. He's not sure if he should open the bottle for him. He asks if he really wants to order a bottle of Aurora Rosso cherry wine. All his classmates are shocked, saying he's gone mad. This wine is worth thousands of dollars. Funk would go to dinner and karaoke with his old classmates and not order such an expensive wine at their expense. It's just some kind of misunderstanding. Shining obviously doesn't know how expensive this wine is. The man with a smile says that he really wants to order this wine and continues saying that it's okay, one of his wealthy acquaintances will pay for it. Fong Billion asks if it really happens, saying that he has this acquaintance. He allows, in this case, to open the bottle. Ziming thinks to himself that this is his chance. The waiter opens the wine, and people think that Ling really has these connections. Who would have thought? It remains about Zine, and he raises the bottle, shouting that the Aurora Rosso caramel-filled costs 250,000 per bottle and is already open, so it's too late to regret. If the tycoon's friends can't pay, he will have to pay by mining coal. His uncle owns a coal company, so he can definitely find a place for him without Ling's 250,000 links. He really doesn't understand why, without thinking to himself that he expected the longer the name, the more expensive the price. Fong Billion says yes, he will be more careful when his hands suggest, and then he will think more before buying something. Fong Billion asks about how everyone is. Almost everyone is here because the wealthy man said he would be in Marite, but he's still not here. Someone said that the wealthy man. In the group chat, it was announced that Fong Billion had already arrived at the Golden Splendor Hall. Billion is shocked and exclaims that he is already here. Zoom then enters, saying it seems he is the last one. Fong Billion approaches him, extending his hand, but Mashelson passes by, ignoring him. Tozin hurries and extends his hand with a smile, expressing his desire to embrace the wealthy man. It turns out that he arrived not long ago, and everyone had to wait for him. The crowd is in shock after these words, looking at them, and they start shouting at the same time, saying, "Sir Rich, you're a truly wealthy man." Fong Billion doesn't understand what's happening and shouts that it can't be. Billions, knowing it can only be him, approach and he becomes the center of attention. All colleagues are shocked by this revelation, actively discussing the events. Someone shouts that it's impossible, he doesn't know what Zenling is up to, but he fooled everyone here. They know his parents only work part-time, and he's just a poor guy in Linda. He can't be a wealthy man. At 11, someone shouts at Fong Bill to face the truth, adding that he's the worst in the group, the most ignorant, incapable of spending anything other than hundreds of thousands of dollars per month. He lost money in stocks without earning a penny, bringing shame to their group. They decide to expel Fong Bill in 2 million, and furthermore, they insult him, saying they will pay all his expenses today. He asks the bartender to serve the most expensive drinks for everyone in the room. Billions are defeated. He was depressed by what was happening, mentally acknowledging that he deserved it. As the party ends, he bids farewell to all his colleagues since he has to leave first. While his colleagues watch her leave, they rejoice among themselves, praising her discreet but immense wealth. However, the protagonist is surprised because she is a rich girl exposed to high society since childhood, yet she shows no surprise at her wealth and does not increase her favorability. For the protagonist, such a challenging person is indeed a great target to spend his money on. However, his thoughts are interrupted by Mr. Janio, who shows his phone, revealing that he previously said he didn't like cars that cost 30 to 40 million. That's why he found a car equivalent to 80 million, with only 10 in the world, and not even in China. He wonders if the protagonist likes it, and the protagonist agrees, saying it looks good, and that's the chosen one. Wow, he can't believe it. Imagine a car worth 80 million, my god. This car is literally coated in gold. He is happy because he closed this 80 million deal with the protagonist. Happily, he rushes off while telling the protagonist that he is right, as the protagonist speaks very quickly. He will take care of it and it will be there in a few days. I mean, the car will be there in a few days. I am curious to see the protagonist looking at his people, saying that he will have to spend a lot of money to recover something. But my god, just look at the numbers in that amount of money, they are literally in the millions. After that, the protagonist was on his way to his room when he encounters his ex-girlfriend. Upon seeing him, she quickly tells the protagonist that he finally came back. Yes, literally, she was waiting for the protagonist. Embracing the arms of the protagonist, she tells him that her father had a heart attack and is now in the hospital, needing surgery. However, her family cannot afford so much money at once, which is why she asks the protagonist if he can lend it to her. However, the protagonist, a bit upset, tells her that it's been 3 years, and she still believes he doesn't know her perfectly. He tells her that she used the excuse of her family being sick 5 times, and this time borrowed more. 800,000 online loans to buy famous brands. Telling her that he won't lend a penny more, she becomes indignant. But upon hearing that he just spent over 10 million on nonsense, she is not willing to deal with 800,000. This prompts the protagonist to tell her that she has no control over how she wants to spend her own money and with whom she wants to spend it. This makes her ask the prota if he is so ruthless, telling him that less than a week has passed since they broke up, but the protagonist just thanks her, saying that he finally had some good days thanks to her but has a dinner date tomorrow. So don't speak anymore, or well, shouldn't speak, and goodbye to the girl. In the face of this, she tells the protagonist that he can't treat her like that. This causes her favorability to drop even further, giving the protagonist a -20%. However, in the face of this, the protagonist thinks that after experiencing what happened with Vanchal, he thought he would change but was thinking too much. The next day, the protagonist, who was walking with his phone, tells us that he sent the location and told her to come there for dinner. However, the protagonist doesn't go because he says that women shouldn't stop him from raising money to hire. However, the protagonist receives a notification that Miss Sasha is live. Furthermore, she said that she's customizing gifts for her guests, something the main character finds interesting. Upon entering the room, he immediately receives a notification from Miss Sasha informing him that someone considered very poor has entered the room. Miss Sasha said that this is very promising, and the protagonist warmly asks if she wants him to go down to her. However, the protagonist does not respond and proceeds to send the God of Fortune. Here it is explained that the God of Fortune is an exclusive customized gift by the protagonist, valued at 800 each. This surprises the girl as it is a considerable amount. The surprise increases when she sees that the protagonist continues to send them, totaling 341 gods of fortune, equivalent to 300 million. Clearly, this greatly increases her favorability by 20%. She is willing to face any challenge the protagonist proposes, specifying that he can request any talent, and she will execute them one by one. However, she receives the bad news that the protagonist has ended the live broadcast, which makes her very sad. While she was a little depressed because the protagonist left the room, he was celebrating because after spending 300 million, he would be reimbursed 30 million. Which made him very happy. He realizes what is happening and says the protagonist just gave him a sports car and another 300 million. This is understandable since he said he bought a sports car to mock those bosses. However, she didn't ask for anything from the protagonist. Presently, she has no challenges in her life, and that's why she wonders why he gave her so much money. Perhaps the protagonist is in love with her. She remembers that men are not trustworthy and that he is just her ATM, and he would never fall in love with her. Nevertheless, she feels intrigued when she sees the protagonist's photo at the school entrance. He mentioned that he would call Aditi. At that moment, she hears shouts from the bullies asking their girlfriends if they think she wouldn't be recognized. They spot her and ask where she wants to go. She notices the protagonist but believes he won't help, and that's exactly what happens. The protagonist turns around and walks away. The girl tells the bully that she really has no money now but might be able to get something in 3 days. However, they don't want to hear it. They ask if she really thinks they can trust her, and she says she will borrow money. This makes them laugh and ask where her boyfriend is. She says he broke her heart, but they don't want to hear more and decide to use her to recover the money. As they try to take her away, she thinks about the protagonist, realizing it's not his fault. She regrets spending so much. Money had been so vain, as perhaps it wouldn't have ended like this if she hadn't done that. She regrets hurting the protagonist so much at this moment. Someone delivers a strong punch to the driver, and it's clearly the protagonist who appears at the scene. The girl immediately smiles happily, and we can see her favorability increasing by another 40%. They launch themselves at him, but the protagonist, with a graceful move, gives them what they deserve and stands in front of them, suggesting they take the $800 and leave. This ends what happens. However, as the money is about to leave, the protagonist tells her that he doesn't think he can return it, warning that she'll have to pay for what she did to him. Alone and out of danger, she apologizes to the protagonist. However, he tells her that if she really knows she's wrong, she shouldn't bother him in the future. This leaves her sad, realizing she's not good enough for the protagonist at that moment. Still, she decides to use actions to make up for the damage caused over the past 3 years. Meanwhile, we see her favorability continuing to increase even more. It sometimes holds me back, but nothing happens after that. The protagonist ends up taking a taxi. If you're wondering why, it's because he's going to visit something at his home. However, during the ride, both the protagonist and the driver have some misunderstandings, but nothing serious happens. I won't summarize this part because it's just plot filler. The only important thing is that the protagonist, after spending $300 million, thinks it's boring to schedule meetings one by one. Also, the reserve money can't just be spent like gas. As the protagonist spent $300 million again, he considers spreading the bait everywhere to focus on casting a wide net. However, when the protagonist, who was already at the agreed location with Oyagi, realizes she's not there, he thinks Naninya City is close to the Inyang University City. Many students go there, and as the main consumers of the stores there are university students, the prices are very affordable. He wonders if she's inviting him to eat there. However, at that moment, the girl opens the door for the protagonist and immediately goes outside. But she ends up pulling the protagonist into her house. Inside, the girl asks the protagonist if he likes what he sees. However, things you see are not asked, but let's not be naughty in our thoughts, as the girl is referring to the house. The protagonist, unaware of this, tells her that he likes it a lot. Sitting down, the girl tells the protagonist to try everything he sees, and she personally made it. The protagonist, upon trying, is impressed because it was delicious, and she never thought she could cook like that. It makes the girl very happy. So she tells the protagonist that she has rented this house for a long time, living there on Saturdays and Sundays when there is no school. She tells the protagonist that he is the first boy to come to her rented house and also the first to eat the food she cooks. This makes the protagonist say that he feels very honored. Looking at some flowers, she asks if they are lilacs on the balcony. This confirms it, telling the protagonist that since he likes the smell of lilacs, she got a vase of them. While the protagonist thinks he has to listen very well to what she is saying, he is not confused but wondering what is happening, as something is wrong with Lugo. There, thinking that since she is not a gold digger, he should find a better way to persuade him to buy. Besides cooking and buying flowers, that's why she puts her hand on his forehead and asks him if everything is okay, if he has a high fever. However, she holds his hand. The protagonist argues to him that she is a very insecure person and that her parents divorced when she was very young, so she felt that the world of people had changed so quickly since she was a child, too much for her to keep up with. Only money could give her the most basic sense of security, but she didn't expect to feel that in the protagonist. Well, she didn't expect to feel security in the protagonist, the security she longed for, telling this protagonist that he pursued the lion for 3 years, demonstrating that he is a very determined person and spent so much money on her but never asked for anything in return. He is completely different from those guys who are very determined and putting on a provocative pose. The protagonist tells him that even though she has fallen in love several times, she has always been protected. So why wait for him to literally run away? Well, after that, she's waiting for the protagonist to take the next step. However, when it seems they're about to kiss, the protagonist ends up remembering that the guy's favorability rate towards him is 91%. He's starting to fall for him. It's no surprise that she is a completely changed person and just thought she could recover the money after completing the counterattack mission and forgot about it. But if she wants to give herself to him, she won't say no. After all, he's a man, and he'll take advantage of it. And so, the protagonist ends up taking the next step, taking something to bed. However, when the protagonist is about to undress, he hears a voice the protagonist recognizes as Tom's voice, his friend who was begging him not to leave. The protagonist, perhaps because he's drunk, ends up confirming that John Shong was shouting, and they end up slapping him. The person who slapped him, a girl who was asking why he was shouting so loudly if he wasn't ashamed and leaving the place, tells him to keep shouting until everyone knows tomorrow. Well, everyone in the school knows. And after the girl leaves, he's just looking for his glasses that fell with the slap. However, at this moment, the protagonist appears, passing his glasses to him, asking him what's going on. The guy responds that unfortunately, the protagonist also knows Nana, whom he's been dating for half a year. Originally, however, before continuing, he is surprised to see Miss Lu acting alongside the protagonist. The protagonist, faced with this, immediately clarifies the situation, telling him that he invited her to dinner and asks him to continue. And when he's a bit discouraged, he continues telling the protagonist that originally, Nana and he went to the date to watch a movie that day. He picked her up and said he would go to Chanel after the movie to buy an anti-wrinkle collection. And when he saw that it cost more than 8,000, he told her that he didn't have the money at that moment. But not. I expected the girl to get upset and stop watching the movie since everything was fine before, and I don't know why she suddenly got angry. This leads him to ask her if he is the girl's boyfriend or Miss Nana's boyfriend. If he is, he tells him that he heard she really has a rich boyfriend, which makes him tell her it's impossible since Nana couldn't have betrayed him. But she tells the boy that, believe it or not, her news is never wrong, which impresses him, especially since they were beating him until the guy with the curly hair came to help his friend. He tells him to call Miss Nana, his girlfriend, and tell her that he will buy the makeup for her, referring to Miss Lu's. She also suggests that he should ask his sister if they saw that man since he wants to see their true faces. Here we can observe how the protagonist told his friend to call his girlfriend and tell her he would buy makeup to place the girl in a specific location. This is because the protagonist wants to see the face of the person his friend has been deceived by, while Mr. F was thoughtful, and the girl accompanying him on the ride asked what was going on. The events unfolded as follows. He replied that perhaps his life would never be the same again, thinking this way because he had almost been expelled from the group. Fortunately, the protagonist spoke in his favor, allowing him to remain in the group. However, now he speaks in the group, and no one listens. If it continues like this, he will surely fall into disgrace. Nevertheless, his thoughts are interrupted by a message that surprises him greatly. But he remains calm as this message is not bad news, it's good news that makes him very happy. He then says, "It's your chance to redeem yourself," and presents the message that left him in this state. The message was from the protagonist asking who owns a shopping mall because he would like to borrow it to help one of his colleagues. Of course, you can probably guess that the owner of this shopping mall is Mr. Phoenix, which is why he reacted this way. The next day, Mr. Phoenix, who was in his car, told the lady accompanying him that he would pick up the protagonist that day and discuss the plan. This made the girl ask if he could see the protagonist in person. However, Mr. Phoenix did not respond as he was thoughtful, telling himself that the most important reason he brings the girls is to make it clear to the protagonist that he dares not have irrational thoughts about AU anymore. But when they finally arrive at the agreed location with the protagonist, she asks excitedly, "Where is the legendary protagonist?" He surprises the protagonist as he is dressed like a normal person. This makes her wonder if he's broke, but let's be honest, the protagonist is dressed like a person without money at the moment. However, while the girl wonders about this, Mr. Fendi finds it interesting that even in a simple environment the protagonist stands out like a Luciana de Escudero. So he tells her that he spends hundreds of millions but still has a modest breakfast, saying, to him, "That's brilliant." This surprises the protagonist a bit, who tells him that he came to this place because it's cheap and delicious, highly recommended. Also, he tells him that they should go to the beach immediately, and the details will be mentioned on the way. While at the beach, it is raining. The protagonist's friend, who was watching his girlfriend from afar, thinks to himself that according to the protagonist's plan, he should first ask his girlfriend to wait at the door. Then, Lova's sister will deceive the man to go there as well. So he will wait to see if they meet and if they are really a couple. However, his suspicions are confirmed as he sees his girlfriend kissing another man. This makes him furious, and he approaches her to ask how she dares to betray him as a mature man. However, he realizes that the other man is the legendary one who was already heading towards the girl and ended up intervening to ask him if he was the poor boyfriend that Miss Nana had talked about. The protagonist decides not to answer the question, so I ask him to get out of the way since this is between him and his girlfriend. This prompts the chubby guy to ask him if he's going to use something to remove him from the path, saying that if he plans to do that, he should know that it might not end well for him. To emphasize his point, he calls security to report that a man is causing trouble there, interfering with his shopping experience. This leads the protagonist's friend to tell him to leave the premises. In a trembling voice, the friend insists that he's not causing any trouble and is just talking to his girlfriend. However, the girl interrupts to tell him not to talk nonsense since the gentleman is her boyfriend, not him. This leaves him indignant, and he asks her why she's doing this, stating that their 6-month relationship can't be compared to this man who appeared out of nowhere. Nevertheless, the girl asks him if he doesn't understand that when security sees them, Mr. Chu is a VIP millionaire customer of this shopping mall. This type of treatment is also received by her. Additionally, she asks him how he can be her boyfriend, how he can endure the difficulties, saying that everyone has to think about their own future. The chubby guy also tells him that he should think about making money instead of having a girlfriend so that he can find a 20-year-old girlfriend when he is 40. However, at the location, Mr. FIM ends up appearing, and the chubby guy recognizes him just by looking at his car, as he told us that he is the youngest son of the owner of the Meridia Hotel and also the owner of the Gym Vi Plaza. Furthermore, he has already done many business deals with him, which surprises the girl because, to her, the chubby guy is amazing. However, they believe that Mr. FIA would greet the chubby guy, but he just walked past him and went to hug the protagonist's friend to ask if he is there to impress the Downtown Foundation, saying that he hopes he reconsiders this investment since they have 2 other malls to develop. This leaves the chubby guy with more questions than answers, but as he processes everything, he realizes that they are impressed because they wonder how he invested in the floor. However, the girl who was with Mr. FIA approaches the protagonist's friend to tell him that she promised to buy him a purse, which makes her ask how Shodom can be so rich, saying that he can spend thousands of dollars on makeup. This makes the red-haired girl ask her if Mr. Show's money is worth it. However, while the girls were debating, Shodom notices the protagonist, and here he realizes that it was the protagonist who called 2 people to help him. Therefore, more confident and adopting a firm posture, he says that he originally was inspecting the mall, but the nasty behavior of this man affected his inspection experience and also seemed to suggest that he was a VIP millionaire or something like that. This makes Mr. Sim ask if this guy is the millionaire VIP of the mall, saying that this man was just tearing apart his entire mall. Therefore, he ends up calling security to tell him to cancel the VIP and the crazy guy because he owes $2 million for breaking the contract. This makes the chubby guy accept what is happening, and it is clear that Mr. FIM is very upset because of this woman and that he does not want to lose a large part of his construction material business because of her. As he does not want that, he tells Mr. Show that everything is a misunderstanding because he really did not know, and therefore, he apologizes to him, saying that he treated it like a fool and let it go, but he smiles. On the simple face, he simply said that it is strong and good, and it turns out that it is serious, which is a defensive thing, the same as understanding what it means. Therefore, he tells the manager who was there that he should also include the faces of these 2 people since he should blacklist them and never allow them to enter the square again. This is something that makes these 2 think they shouldn't do it. However, the protagonist with a cold look made the chubby one, who is so old that he might not be able to get up after a fall. The girl, seeing that everything is going from bad to worse, asks the chubby one what they are going to do now. Enraged, he tells her that his construction materials company is famous from now on, and although he doesn't cooperate with the man, he still has many contacts. Therefore, he asks her to leave. However, when they were about to leave, many sports cars end up stopping in front, which surprises the chubby one because he knows very well that all these sports cars belong to the second rich and young generation, so he wonders why everyone is there, but the answer is obvious since they are all there because of the protagonist's friend. Because the protagonist asked for help from everyone, upon seeing so many wealthy young people gathered in one place, and they are there to see the big show, he can't resist and ends up giving something. However, in the face of so much help offered to him, the protagonist's friend ends up thanking. However, the protagonist tells him not to thank because, as his friend, he had to help him. But even though the protagonist helped him, he has a doubt, so he asks the protagonist how he knows so many rich acquaintances. The protagonist explains to his friend that it's not like that, saying that they are contacts the Lord has in his work environment, which is very broad and includes group performances and other things. But even though the protagonist did not tell the truth to his friend, he ended up believing in his words. After thanking, the protagonist's friend leaves, but the girl who was watching from afar stays. Seeing the protagonist, she becomes pensive. However, before they could explain what she was thinking, the protagonist interrupts to thank her, suggesting that she might want to invite everyone for a hot meal. As the protagonist's proposal is not bad, everyone agrees, and the Lord comes to say that they should go to the subbar on the 7th floor of the mall, something everyone accepts, including the protagonist, who thought he had never been to such a luxurious place. Therefore, the protagonist wonders if it's not too expensive, but of course, he has no right to ask that. After that, they go to the Silver Moon Hotel, and all the wealthy young people were already gathered there. One of the wealthy young men there comments that the protagonist gave 100 million to each of 3 stars the day before, so in just one day, the number of beautiful girls registered on the entire platform doubled. This makes one of them say that the protagonist feels like a poor man, causing others to suspect that the protagonist is the son of one of the most invisible tycoons in the capital. While they are discussing this, one of them asks the girl next to him why she is so silent and continues drinking alcohol, saying that he believes the reason she is like that. However, he would like to help her, but the project he proposes is not only expensive but also crazy. Not even the top leader of Chinese technology could solve it, asking how a small team created less than a year ago could solve it. Furthermore, why is she so determined to start her own project? If the protagonist didn't give you more than 10 million in the group last time and he spent it so quickly, while he warns the protagonist that don't listen because he's plotting something scandalous and anyone who gets involved in this game will lose everything. However, the same for being chattering, the girl ends up sending the protagonist to heaven. Facing this, he tells her that she is the treasure of the group, asking where he should spend his stomach. While we can observe the system sending a message to the protagonist saying that he must start the counterattack mission. Furthermore, we can observe that her favorability is more than 10, which makes the protagonist think that he cannot let the opportunity to get a girl and make money pass. The girl continues to explain to the protagonist that she is in the business of making industrial chips, which makes the protagonist tell her that it is outrageous stupid. Since only a stupid dream. However, Miss Jean tells him that there is nothing stupid about it and academically possible, telling him that his company has been working on this project for over a year and only needs to solve some minor technical problems. Approaching the protagonist, she asks him, what do you think about investing in your project? This while he thought that anyway the protagonist would probably go for all this like everyone else. However, it is exactly the opposite, since the protagonist tells her that industrial chips are genius in New York. They are ahead of the technology of his country, and if this chip could be developed in the country, it will have more chances to compete with the Americans. Therefore, the protagonist tells her to accept the investment in her project, which impresses her since the protagonist agreed to the project, which for her is complete madness. Facing this, the girl asks the prota if he agrees to get married, asking if he won't research her company first, since it is a great possibility that it will not work, which seems not to matter to the prota, since he tells her that there is no need for any investigation, saying that first he will transfer the money and then he can send the contract. Furthermore, he tells her that he transferred 500 million and when that runs out she should ask for more money, and she should also worry if it doesn't work because there is no problem, since the protagonist likes to support entrepreneurship. Since the protagonist enjoys supporting entrepreneurship, he tells her that he doesn't know why, but she seems trustworthy or much less deceiving than everyone else present, as she is the only person taking his ideas seriously. He says this or asks if he is mistaken. However, in response, the girl does not answer the protagonist. Instead, while looking at her phone, she receives a message stating that she has received 500 million in her account. Surprised, she looks at the protagonist and says, well, she says that, and the protagonist truly believes her. Meanwhile, we can observe how her favorability increases by another 20%. The protagonist is surprised that she invested so much money in such a project, and people say that this money will probably be lost. Therefore, as this is not normal, they ask if the protagonist fell in love with Miss Young and bought her smile with money. However, this is far from the truth. The protagonist says goodbye as he has unfinished business, leaving the girl impressed. Although he invested money, he didn't give it much importance. But something happened when the protagonist left. Everyone started to argue because he forgot to pay the bill. None of them wanted to pay, but the protagonist thought differently, stating that it was too expensive, and he couldn't afford to pay. He said he didn't feel like inviting them. After some time passes, we transition to Miss Jean's house, who was exercising and talking on the phone. She expresses surprise as she received an investment, affirming that she still can't believe it. Here, we meet the person on the other end of the call who congratulates her for solving the biggest financial problem on her business trip. Miss Jean confirms this and recalls how her father opposed her business to the point of blocking all her cards. Due to this, She had no choice but to borrow from relatives who refused to help, as her father had informed everyone about her situation. Back in the present, she is motivated to move forward, and the person on the other end of the call supports her decision, saying that they believe in her. Miss Jean then tells the person with blue skin that they are just talking about themselves. The blue-skinned person asks her about the meeting, and she explains that it was supposed to be a regular party. However, one of her colleagues surprised everyone with their knowledge of relic evaluation, comparable to their masters. If the blue-skinned nickname is referring to the protagonist, Miss Jean is a bit surprised and asks if she is really interested in a guy. Since it doesn't happen every day, Blue was interrupted by her mother, who told her it was time to leave. Before leaving, her mother reminded Blue that Mr. Chow represented the Chow family, which would become the curator of their museum in the future. Blue reluctantly agreed, but didn't seem happy with this decision. The story then shifted to the protagonist, who was arriving at the dormitories. Upon entering, he noticed that his friend was sick. He asked what was happening, and his friend explained that he had a fever and asked the protagonist to cover his shift at work that night. He agreed to do it for $50, as he had nothing else to do. While looking for a uniform, the protagonist realized that Gut worked the night shift at the museum 7 nights a week, and Zotam couldn't replace him due to Gut's fear of the dark. Therefore, he found himself obliged to help his friend. Leaving the place, the protagonist told his roommate that he was going to work, and he should rest. His friend supported him, saying he should go out once and for all and visit a museum. Facing the museum, the protagonist, who was already there, replaced his friend and noticed that there was no one in the museum that day. He checked his phone and wondered why not spend some money on enjoyment. While the protagonist was spending his money, a car appeared, and 2 people got out. It seemed that the man who got out of the car was Mr. Chow, who asked the museum guide to accompany him. The guide pointed the way, but the protagonist was distracted by his phone, which Mr. Chow noticed. He asked the guide if they had hired a blind person to work at the museum since the protagonist didn't even stand up to greet him. The protagonist finally stood up, apologized, and welcomed them. Mr. Chow asked if the protagonist was a university student working temporarily at the museum, which surprised the guy. She commented that the protagonist seemed more suited to be a security guard. Mr. Chow agreed and mentioned that the protagonist's excuse seemed sincere. The protagonist replied that in school, he learned not to judge people by their appearance, not to judge a book by its cover. Mr. Chow was impressed with this response but still dissatisfied. He asked if the protagonist planned to give him lessons. The protagonist denied it and said that he, too, was an enthusiast like Mr. Chow. Offended by the protagonist's disrespect, Mr. Chow asked the guide not to want to see him at the museum from the next day. However, the guide explained that they needed staff and would continue working together. Mr. Chow became furious and told the guide to shut up, questioning who the protagonist thought he was. He insisted that the protagonist be removed immediately. The protagonist agreed with Mr. Chow and followed him down the path as the director was waiting. While observing from a distance, the protagonist noticed that the guide mentioned the director's name, Jay, making him think that the museum belonged to the John family, i.e., Blue's family. Therefore, he decided to go in and talk to her. On the second floor, Mr. Chow was welcomed by the director, who greeted him and shook his hand, expressing happiness that he wanted to contribute to the preservation of history, and his family was delighted with. Calling her Blue, he told her that she should show him the museum, which she accepted. However, as Blue passed by him, her father, the investment of Mr. Chow is very important, and they rely on him for it to be a success. With that said, by the Blue law, Mr. Chow is told that he needs it because it will showcase the treasures of his museum. Upon encountering a painting, Blue states that it's the only one with the handwriting of the god of poetry and unique in its genre. The 200-word poem speaks of the sorrow of parting from a friend, and if you look closely at the image, you can feel the poet's emotions while writing the poem. However, it becomes evident that Mr. Chow is not interested in the paintings but in the girl. She immediately notices this, removes his hand, and questions what he is doing. He apologizes, stating that she is so beautiful that he can't help. The girl realizes he's not interested in the artifacts and asks why he invested in the museum. He replies that he spent his money on what he wanted. She becomes upset, commenting that if he knew more about the subject, he'd realize the artifacts aren't worth the cost. She questions why her father would accept such an investment. He reveals that she has a unique quality no other woman has, and he likes it. He claims he'll show her the real world, offering to buy the museum for $600 million with the condition that she marries him. Her father thinks it's too much, and she declares she'll never marry him. She asks her father to send him away, but he's considering the 600 million. He reveals the truth. After 2 consecutive years, the eel museum can't function and is on the brink of destruction. Mr. Chow isn't there to invest but to buy the museum. The girl is shocked, asking her father what he said. Mr. Chow approaches, claiming he's the last hope to save them from bankruptcy. He reassures the father that his daughter will have a better life if she marries him. The girl turns to her mother, questioning if she should sell herself to this man. The mother apologizes, claiming she's worthless and leaves the decision in her hands. The father adds that he didn't want to marry her off this way, but if they don't sell the museum, they'll go bankrupt. The father continues, stating that most of these artifacts are bought by distributors and collectors with low profits or end up on the black market, leaving the girl conflicted. She remembers telling her father when she was little that their artifacts were precious, and she could see who made them. She disagrees with people who buy or sell artifacts on the black market, thinking that the rich don't value them and only care about making money. She thought there were things money couldn't buy, but facing reality, she realizes everything is fragile. Mr. Chow, seeing the pensive girl, assures her that he'll be good to her after the marriage. He promises to buy another museum if she gives him a child. The girl, realizing she has no other option, reluctantly accepts. She informs everyone that she understands what is happening and accepts. Her father praises her growth and pride, urging her to sign the contract. After a while, the contract and guide are brought in. The guide states that the agreement will take effect after both parties sign and cannot be altered. The girl's father has no issue with this, as Mr. Chow is very generous. Mr. Chow assures the mother that her daughter will be happy marrying him. Having no other choice, the girl signs the contract. Pen in hand, ready to sign something he seems very happy or eager to happen. However, the girl clearly doesn't want to sign at all, as she can be seen with tears in her eyes. Nevertheless, they end up listening to the gods, as when she was about to sign, the protagonist appears on the scene asking about someone buying the museum. Clearly, everyone is surprised by this, but the most surprised to see the protagonist is Aple Azul, the cable officer. He is surprised to talk to the protagonist, but due to their differences, he immediately calls security to remove the protagonist from there. However, the protagonist tells the cable officer that he works as a security guard at the museum during the night. The protagonist is the one who holds that position, making the cable officer very angry. He tries to kick him, but the protagonist defends himself by slapping him. The cable officer receives what he deserves from the ground, asking the protagonist how he dares to hit him, threatening to make him lose his job and sue him. However, the protagonist pays no attention to his words and simply approaches Aple Azul to wipe away her tears, leaving her very embarrassed. Her father is a bit confused and asks his daughter if she knows the protagonist, to which she replies that his name is Lingerie and that he was her classmate. This makes the father ask why a boy her age should focus on his studies and not become a security guard like the protagonist. Not understanding what is happening, the protagonist will let it go but will have to apologize to the cable officer and pay for what he did. However, while the father and daughter talk, the protagonist reads the contract and breaks it, surprising everyone. Grabbing the contract, the cable officer asks the protagonist what he did, but the protagonist did it for a reason. He offers $1 billion for the museum. This makes the cable officer mock the protagonist, saying he is talking nonsense and asking how a simple security guard can have so much money. He says that if he really buys it, he'll eat his hat. However, the protagonist rejects it, saying that the last person who said that lost and didn't fulfill his promise. The parents of Aple Azul, upon hearing the protagonist's offer, are surprised and ask her if the protagonist is rich. However, the girl apparently knows nothing about the protagonist and tells her parents that she doesn't know if he is rich. On the other hand, the cable officer calls 15 people to tell them that there is an idiot at the museum causing trouble and tells them to bring some people there to teach the protagonist a lesson. While the cable officer was talking, Aple Azul wonders what the protagonist is doing there since he shouldn't be there. However, Aple Azul's father approaches the protagonist and tells him that obviously the protagonist is there for his daughter and that he won't say anything. He says that if the protagonist can guarantee $1 billion, the first payment should be for Pedro, the floor consisting of just 4 words, "Buy it for my daughter." However, the cable officer, seeing the protagonist holding the contract, tells him not to do it because he can say he doesn't have money and leave. However, the protagonist once again ignores his words while reading the contract and feels bad because he is about to treat the girl as an object, and all of this seems very strange and disturbing, and this only happens to him. However, looking at the artifact that the girl was showing to the cable officer earlier, he realizes the great significance it has. In fact, it has a great poem written on it that says, "The setting sun stretches over the withered willows only for a gentle wind, and the shadow is soaked with tears." Approaching the cable officer, he realizes that the artifact has great power, leaving everyone confused, or rather, they don't understand what the protagonist is doing. However, they are surprised when the protagonist mentions that he wants to change the contract, and as the protagonist wants to change the contract, the protagonist approaches someone to ask them to do this quickly. The guide apologizes but cannot change the contract. Meanwhile, the father of the girl with blue eyes tells the protagonist not to dare to pay a penny less. However, the protagonist insists that he only wants to spend those billions to buy the museum, and the artifacts are not included in the cost. He mentions that these paintings, calligraphy, and artifacts stored in the museum are priceless and cannot be measured in money, so they still belong to the family. Approaching the girl with blue eyes, he tells her to have respect and genuinely loves these artifacts. Therefore, the right to use the museum and eliminate the artifacts should belong to the girl with blue eyes. Additionally, he states that he will be the largest shareholder with the absolute right to make decisions, and the girl with blue eyes will be the owner of the Anian Museum. He signs the contract in her name with a charming smile, telling her that if she needs money for the museum or has any personal problems, she should call him. This increases her favorability by another 20%. However, when the protagonist swipes his credit card, he succeeds, and it shows how the protagonist spent billions, leaving everyone astonished, wondering how rich the protagonist must be. Only Mr. Chow is terrified, thinking about how the protagonist can spend billions like that. Another person, a blue-eyed girl who was visiting, approaches the protagonist and asks why he did it. The protagonist smiles and says that he will buy all the remaining artifacts in China, emphasizing that these artifacts are treasures belonging to the Chinese people. Mr. Chow overhears this and mentions that the protagonist just bought a museum with a complete collection worth over $500 million, and he talks about bringing back artifacts from around the world. He suggests that if the protagonist is so interested, he should attend the auction in Japan next month, where there are paintings of miles of mountains and rivers, crystal statues of the goddess of mercy, each worth over $1 billion. He proposes that the protagonist go and try to buy everything there instead of just talking about it. The protagonist agrees and says he will definitely go to the auction outside the museum. The protagonist's assistant asks Mr. Chow if there will be trouble for the protagonist, but Mr. Chow denies it and says he only wants to cause conflict. At this moment, Mr. Chow receives a call asking about the museum purchase. He mentions that it's the first step in the East Asian artifact collection project of Grand Comida. He leaked it, but they shouldn't lose sight of the protagonist. However, Mr. Chow assures that everything is going well at first, but suddenly a Chinese idiot appeared out of nowhere and bought the museum. Still, he says not to worry because he managed to get the protagonist to attend the auction next month, and there will be an opportunity to apologize in person. Finally, they mention that after signing the contract, the protagonist became the largest and sole shareholder of the Anian Museum. Both the father and mother of the blue-eyed girl thank the protagonist and invite him for a meal in gratitude. However, the protagonist declines, saying he's on the night shift and not hungry. This increases his favorability by another 10%. As the protagonist leaves, the blue-eyed girl's father asks if he's really going to Japan next month, and the protagonist confirms that she will accompany him when the time comes. This is when we see that the blue-haired character has begun to show interest in the protagonist after he bought a museum and made her the owner. Thanks to all this, we see his popularity increase even more. However, the next day, the protagonist, who was going to class, tells us that he was on duty at the museum the night before, and the blue-haired girl talked to him until midnight. But when he least expected it, she involuntarily fell asleep, and now he will have to sit with her since she didn't complete the sentence. The protagonist couldn't consume anything last night, as both the light and act of the protagonist's ex-girlfriend noticed it. They approached him to ask what was happening, expressing concern. The protagonist, feeling their worry, explained that lack of sleep is not good and suggested they go home and rest. However, the protagonist's current girlfriend, slightly jealous, questioned him and suggested he sit next to her in class in a seductive manner. She proposed he could lay his head on her lap to listen and rest at the same time. The protagonist rejected this proposal, asking why she was clinging to him again, questioning if she didn't remember what she had said before. Before the protagonist could finish his sentence, she interrupted, stating that she remembers everything but can't help being deeply in love with him. She doesn't care if he's rich or not, she just wants to start over. Showing a crane, presumably a gesture of sincerity, she tells him to appreciate and correct his past mistakes. The protagonist thinks to himself that she has made 999 of these cranes before but discarded them, so she must have been upset about it. However, the crane she made with her own hands will touch his heart this time. Meanwhile, her popularity increases to over 86%. The protagonist realizes she is lying because, to him, 86% is not equal to 100%. He knows she is not completely in love. He thinks his ex-girlfriend is not the type to be moved by kindness. Otherwise, she wouldn't have left him for Alfonso. She clings to him because she feels very alone. As the protagonist leaves, the rivalry intensifies, with the current girlfriend believing she's gaining ground and the ex-girlfriend clearly upset. After class, the girls still cling to the protagonist. Luz and Act suggest he can go to her apartment and sleep there without any issues. The ex-girlfriend interrupts, telling her that he's not her boyfriend, so it's not appropriate to invite him to her house. Despite the discussion, the protagonist asks them to stop dragging him, as he doesn't want to become famous for it. Suddenly, a car appears out of nowhere and takes him away. The protagonist finds himself sitting on someone's lap, surprised by the unexpected situation. He asks if it was Miss Sasha who took him, and she inquires if he's injured. Surprised by her presence, the protagonist requests to get up, but Miss Sasha tells him to take his time and rest for a bit, which he gladly accepts, thanking her for arriving just in time. She mentions it as gratitude for all his donations. The protagonist agrees, considering it fair. Meanwhile, Miss A observes them and wonders who the girl is that the protagonist took in front of everyone. People mention it's a Ferrari LF worth around $30 million. Some wonder how the protagonist, seemingly an ordinary person, managed to get such a car. The boy managed to win over this rich girl while others believe that she must also be rich and famous. However, they are all wrong. Snow, the protagonist, becomes upset hearing the comments from other guys, knowing that other rich girls will probably approach him now that they know he is wealthy. Acting on this realization, she mocks him, recalling that she used to ignore him before but can't anymore. Snow believes that Agir is just boasting and doesn't believe her. However, she remembers that the protagonist is simple and wonders how long he will withstand such harassment. She takes a firm stance, declaring that the protagonist is her ex-boyfriend and belongs only to her. Her popularity increases even more with this statement. Meanwhile, the protagonist receives many notifications from the system, informing him that Lu's favorability level has increased to over 90%, triggering a hiring level. He is surprised and asks what is happening. The system informs him that 800,000 units of the game's currency were spent on his girlfriends, and 10% of that amount was transferred to his personal account. The protagonist is surprised by this. Before he can process it all, the system sends another notification, stating that his rewards have increased in all current level statistics. His strength, endurance, and dexterity have increased, leaving him very satisfied. Additionally, he gets the opportunity to choose 3 additional Class B skills: long-distance running, swimming mastery, and dance mastery. The protagonist finds long-distance running skills useless and chooses swimming mastery. He quickly feels his brain filling instantly with knowledge about swimming, and his chest, back, and arm muscles strengthen. However, while he is thinking about this, both he and Miss Sasha are being observed by a man who was alerted by his assistant that they were ready for a meeting. After this meeting, we can see how everyone present is debating the protagonist's situation, as he broke some rules and is therefore angry. By the way, he is the president who claims that Janssen University is known for its excellent learning environment and spirit. 2 other girls just started a mess on the campus, complicating their relationship. His new girlfriend began running across the campus at full speed, and now everyone knows about it. The protagonist surprises this man, Mr. Chuck, who asks if these boys are not from the literature department. The boy's name is Linger, our protagonist. The president tells him that the previous student council president always praised him and said that the literature department man is a serious and responsible person. However, he also reprimands the protagonist for his unacceptable behavior and promises to take immediate action to punish him. The protagonist responds that the student council should support all university students, admit their mistakes, and promise not to break the rules again. The next day, the protagonist is accompanied by one of his colleagues, who says that the student council really went too far, forcing him to clean the pool throughout the semester. However, the protagonist doesn't seem upset. He explains that rules exist for the safety and well-being of everyone in the university community. While he was cleaning the pool, some girls began to notice his growing popularity. As he saw this happening, he thought that the protagonist was just another conqueror. However, as soon as he finished that thought, she felt a cramp and wondered how it was possible since she had warmed up well before starting. She started sinking in the pool, thinking she was about to drown. However, the others noticed, and the protagonist realized that she was in danger. Without hesitation, he threw himself in her direction, and the most surprising thing was not only his readiness to perceive the danger and act but also his professional swimming ability. The protagonist reached the girl, who, upon seeing him touch her, said that luck had told her it wasn't luck. However, the protagonist did the same, telling her to calm down and breathe, thus asking her to. The girl, do not move, for it will lead you to love. However, the girl, upon seeing the protagonist Nadal, is surprised by him because he could swim so fast, even holding her with a single hand. But now, at this moment, he doesn't give her much importance, remembering the protagonist's name. She thinks to herself that she has never been so close to a boy before. However, when the protagonist takes the girl to the shore in the most careful way possible, he tells her to be more careful next time. With this action, the protagonist has planted his seeds in the girl. But like the protagonist's lasagna, it was incredible and magnificent. The people who were there, looking at the protagonist, said he is very cool and fast, as he had just broken a new record. They say they have the whole video and want to publish it on the internet. Passing by the brown girl who was surprised by what the protagonist just did, looking at her friend, she tells her that the protagonist is the guy she called boring and seems to be a good person. He even saved her life, and he is very fast. So, she asks her if he wouldn't be suitable for her. Remember that her friend asks this because she said she was looking for a guy faster than her. Without further ado, we can see how she reacts upon hearing the protagonist's name. Her pulse accelerates, which makes her friend ask her why her face is so red. Another person who noticed this was the previous guy, the one who is in love with her, who also realized that the girl is in love with the protagonist. But besides all this, here they present us how someone posted the video in which the protagonist rescued the girl. Apparently, this video became famous simply because the protagonist is very fast, and when I say fast, he is really fast, as he even broke the record that existed. However, someone who was not satisfied with the protagonist's impact is the president, who angrily says that he will definitely destroy him. The truth is that it is not clear why he feels this way, as he seems to have a hatred for the protagonist. The next day at the student party, someone argues that the student party was organized by the student council and that there will be a big mysterious prize. The student council decided to invest a lot in this occasion. Also, as the students were there, let me tell you that both were really handsome. However, Lucy tells the protagonist's ex-boyfriend that she looks very beautiful that day, but it's a pity that the protagonist is not paying attention to her because he is very well dressed. However, instead of getting upset with her, he thanks her for the compliment and says he hopes she enjoys the night to the fullest because everything will change after that night. These words make her think that the protagonist's ex-girlfriend is plotting something. However, she doesn't care much about it because she says it's better to forget it since she first needs to cut a steak for the protagonist, and when he arrives, they will eat immediately. They will definitely dance together that night. However, the protagonist's ex-girlfriend doesn't think the same way because she thinks Lucy always strives to play the role of the smart, kind girl and wonders if Lucy really thinks no one notices. She then says that Lucy really thinks she can control guys with her tricks, but before, she says it's an obstacle that needs to be removed, and this obstacle is the pink girl who is wondering where the protagonist is, as she wants to see him again and thank him. If it weren't for the protagonist, she would probably be dead. However, before she finishes her thoughts, she is interrupted by the protagonist's boyfriend, who tells me that he is delighted to meet her. He thinks that this girl is probably thinking of getting close to the protagonist just because he saved her from the accident. However, as Lucy does not know the protagonist's ex-girlfriend, she asks who she is. The girl introduces herself as Lucy, the protagonist's girlfriend, and asks if a new video is talking about her. She then says that her boyfriend has always been very responsible and kind, frequently helping people, and the protagonist pursued her for 3 years before she finally accepted to be his girlfriend. Laughing, she asks if Lucy knows why she's saying this and then says, in the end, they are happy together. She approaches Lucy, saying that she hopes they enjoy the night anyway. He wanted to thank the protagonist, but it's not necessary, as the protagonist will be busy tonight because he has a date. Putting on a Santa mask, she asks if he understands, to which he responds affirmatively. While staying in place, she shouts again that he understood, and the protagonist's boyfriend, realizing that he managed to distance the girl from the protagonist, says that he has no chance against her. This happens while we can observe how her popularity increases, giving her a popularity rating of 91%. However, regretting the case, this is how we end this video. But if you liked it, leave your like. If you want the continuation, leave your comment below, and remember, it's very good that the lazy soul wants everything but nothing reaches.